Lessons Not Yet Learnt is a podcast that uncovers the costly mistakes that businesses keep making and how to finally move past them. Through storytelling, candid conversations, and expert perspectives, I'm on a mission to challenge outdated thinking, bring those overlooked lessons to the surface, and drive meaningful change, one story at a time. Hi, welcome to Lessons Not Yet Learnt. I'm your host, Kiran Kachela. On today's episode, we're talking about cultural shifts and the future of work. Now, when I think back to what culture I came up in throughout my career, it was such a different place. It's almost unrecognizable. I remember my first proper office job, and I used to have to be in on the dot at 8 a.m. And if I was a few minutes late, it would be frowned upon. You would actually get pulled up on it. And my day didn't finish at 5. Oh no, that was just the minimum standard. I was actually expected to work till about 6, 7, sometimes later in the evening. Why? Because everybody else did. Within the office, everybody worked till about 7, 8, and there was just this culture of presenteeism, just being seen. And if you were to leave early, you would get that look. You would be seen as somebody that was lazy or uncommitted. I'm pretty sure that everybody in the office was just looking out to see who was going to be the first person to leave the office. So that was quite a tough environment. At that time, I worked in a really male-dominated environment too. In fact, I've worked in a male-dominated environment for most of my career. But at that time in particular, you'd never catch me wearing a dress like I am today. No, I used to wear a suit and a shirt and look very masculine. And it was because I felt this pressure to fit in. It was quite a difficult environment, and I felt that I needed to show masculinity to be taken seriously. At that particular time, I used to feel like showing my femininity was seen as a weakness. I wanted to be taken seriously. I wanted to have that gravitas. And so I decided to dress like everybody else in the office. When I look back now, I wish I just celebrated the difference. Now, as the years went on, I started to climb the career ladder and then fell pregnant with my first daughter, who is now 17. And at the time, I was really lucky and blessed to have a really compassionate and supportive leader. He never made me feel like an inconvenience or guilty for going to a midwife appointment. I felt like I was in a really safe and supported environment. When I came back from maternity leave, I was offered an opportunity to take a bigger central role. It was a bigger challenge, it was career progression, and I jumped at it because I wasn't ready to sacrifice my career. I wanted to do career and be a great mum. So I took on this great, exciting role. But I was met by a real mixed bag of leaders. And there were absolutely leaders that I came up against that made me feel like I was not taking work seriously if I had to work from home one day because my daughter was unwell. I remember once coming off a call, bursting into tears because I did have one of those days where my daughter was unwell. I had to work from home and had to do a meeting online. And they made me feel like I was someone that wasn't committed, wasn't taking my career seriously. And it was a real tough time because I didn't want to have to pick between being a businesswoman and progressing in my career and being a good mum. I wanted to do both, and I knew I could do both. So looking back now, I realise how unfair that environment and that situation was. Now, further years went by, time went on, and I had a new boss. And this new boss was a strong female leader. She was firm and stern, but very fair. She had great gravitas. She was very intelligent, someone I really looked up to. And to my surprise, when everybody in that office stayed behind till 7, 8 p.m, she would leave at 5 p.m. on the dot every single day. Now, at that time, she didn't have kids. It wasn't because of kids that she was leaving early. She just had boundaries. After work, she would go and meet up with friends for a social and have some drinks or grab a bite to eat. And I really looked up to that because she didn't conform to this culture of presenteeism. It was all about her outputs. And so that really taught me something. It taught me that the proof is in the pudding. I know I'm good at what I do, and I should be recognized for that, not for being seen as present in the office. Now, all of these different experiences, the good and the bad, the highs and the lows, they've all taught me so much, and they've made me who I am today. And today, my company CI Projects is something I'm so proud of. Everybody, what we've created is just something spectacular. We recently did an employee survey, and I was really pleased to see that 100% of the team love the collaboration in the office. So on the days that they're in the office, they really like collaborating, working together, learning from one another. But equally, 100% of our team said that they really had a good work-life balance. And for me, that meant a lot. Having seen how difficult it was during my career, this is something I'm such an advocate for. Making sure that, people have a good work-life balance, making sure that when we bring somebody onto the team, we take time to understand what matters to them personally, and making sure that we can help accommodate that and support their personal needs as well as their career needs. And no, it's not about policies we've set. Yes, we offer hybrid working. Yes, we offer part-time hours. Yes, we offer flexibility for new parents, whether it's mother or father. We offer all of that great stuff. We're very compassionate to our team. But really, what it all boils down to is trust and respect. And yes, it is a tight rope. There is a need for people to deliver. There is a need for outputs. And as such, you need people around you. You need resources. Yes, absolutely. But I always say a fulfilled employee is more likely to perform much higher than somebody that isn't fulfilled because they're not getting what they need out of their personal lives and their careers. And I think businesses have a big role to play in this. And that's why I'm really excited to introduce my guest today, who is so passionate about this very topic. His name is Noel, and he has spent over 25 years across various industries, from the NHS to tech to finance and property. He's worked in a number of industries as a senior PMO lead, but he is super passionate about driving work-life balance, making sure that organizations are building the right culture and around condensed hours. So this is something I'm really excited to uncover and explore further. Hi, Noel. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks, Kiran. Nice for you to have me on this on the show.
It's great to have you on. So, Noel, tell me, you're really passionate about driving the right culture in a workplace and ensuring that people are getting what they need personally and getting that flexibility. What's driven that passion?
Oh, what a question. I think it started, I've been managing sort of teams, whether it's portfolios or programs or project teams. You work with all different types of personalities. You work with all different people from all different backgrounds. Everyone's at a different stage in their life, depending on, where you are with that person. And I've just realized that in order to be a good leader or good manager, you need to sort of make sure that you've set up your team and the culture within that team to perform as well as they can through having very sort of open sort of ways of working for sometimes individual members, because, someone who's got children versus someone who's early on in their career, who's, maybe in their early 20s, who doesn't have children, they're going to need different things in order for them to feel motivated. So that has always been something that I've really been quite conscious of as a manager or a team leader.
What you're saying is, as a leader, it's really important to understand the individuals that make up our team and what their personal needs are.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sort of you've got company culture, whatever that is, however big your organization is, but that doesn't necessarily need to be everything that you abide by. And I think sort of you're going to have unique types of pockets of where you can potentially change that culture if it's not as great as it should be, I think a manager and a team leader or project manager or program manager, a PMO manager, they have some freedom to sort of like create things and almost like trial new ways of working whilst you're doing a piece of work. And I think that's one thing I've always had a passion for, to sort of like try and see, can we do something better, and can we still maintain our objectives and whatever it is that we're trying to deliver by changing the norms. And I think I always come across a lot of cultural ways of working that are set from decades in the past. And I think sometimes we don't feel comfortable to challenge those outdated practices.
Yeah, that's status quo. And I think experimentation should be a really key part of any leader's role.
Definitely.
You've got to try different things and see what works, what doesn't work. And as you say, even at an individual level, some things are going to work for some that aren't going to work for others.
Yeah.
So I completely recognize that.
Yeah, back in sort of 2016, 2017, I was leading a team of sort of 25 project managers, business analysts. And the culture back then in this organization was sort of like be quite presenteeism, where everyone had to be in the office and you had to sort of like show your face to sort of like make people aware of what you're doing. And I sort of challenged that back then to say, look, we're all project professionals. We can do our job as long as whatever it is that we're trying to do is clear and well defined in terms of your objectives. Doesn't matter where you are to do those things. Are you delivering against whatever those objectives are? And if the answer is yes, you don't need to be in the office 100% of the time. And so we introduced Microsoft Teams, in that organization as a pilot. And we just saw that we were able to do exactly the same thing, and sometimes more efficiently, working in a very flexible way. And that really challenged the rest of the IT team that we were part of, because they were all working Monday to Friday in the office. And I got a lot of challenges from a lot of stakeholders behind my reasons behind this. But I kept on saying to them, are we delivering and are we exceeding your expectations? And if the answer was yes, then we're doing okay.
Exactly. What's the issue then? I think that's a really good reminder for people, because as you say, it's so easy to fall into that common trap of just, well, this is the culture of the organization. This is the way things work. This is a policy. We all have to abide by a policy. And actually, as leaders, the whole premise is leadership. We're there to lead our team, and leadership means you're doing what's best for your team and experimenting and seeing what's going to work, what's not going to work. And you're absolutely right to say we need to trial different approaches and not just do what we've always done, because we're not willing to challenge that. Have you seen examples where perhaps people haven't performed so well because they've had to conform to a culture that doesn't align with them?
Yeah, I think sort of, I look at my life pre-children and then post-children, right? And, hopefully this resonates with people that become working parents. And I feel like if you're in a job pre-having children, you have a lot of freedom and you have your own responsibilities to look after, or maybe your partner and yourselves to sort of look after. Whereas once you become a working parent, your whole world changes quite a lot. And I feel like in terms of this lessons not yet learned, I feel like on reflection, how could I become a better manager to understand where they were coming from, people that had children and had different requests, sometimes very last minute requests for changing their schedule. And was I able to sort of like be as honest and open and flexible with them? Probably the answer is no, but I can look back on that and go, well, that's just something I've now learned myself through the experiences I've got as a parent. And I feel like companies and organizations just need to be a little bit more open to, especially working parents, because there's a lot of us out there and we are trying to sort of raise good human beings that then come into the workplace in the future. We've got to be a lot more supportive of the working parent out there. And I'm not too sure organizations always get that. And I feel like that's something that, we can always have open conversations about what can we do to support working parents better.
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I'm a working parent myself, and earlier talked a little bit about my own journey and the stigma really around, you almost are made to feel guilty for asking for some time off or a last minute request because something's come up. It's it's a very difficult environment when you don't even feel open to be able to just ask for something quite normal and something that probably barely impacts your work, actually.
Definitely. I feel like some of the things that I have seen in terms of like where it does work is sort of having policies and open policies. And that is one of maybe, but open is like everyone is aware of what working parents are able to do. And as an example, we'll probably get on the topic of compressed hours, flexible working patterns and arrangements. I feel like even though organizations might have these in place, are people truly, and I'm talking specifically from my perspective, working partners, to our partners that are mothers, are we truly aware of like what dads and partners are actually able to do when it comes to shared parental leave, when it comes to sort of like saving on childcare costs through working compressed hours? All of these things, I think, is almost like you have to work it out yourself. Yeah. You have to put the effort in with that HR department or their HR policies to work out what can you do. And I feel like that's something that if it was more open, more transparent, more just understood, as soon as you start an organization, I feel like there's a better chance that working parents and partners are potentially going to uptake some of these policies that will help ultimately sort of like, co-parent together much better.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I've not really thought about it that way before, but you're so right that, just because they've put a policy up on the intranet, that doesn't actually mean that it's supporting the needs of staff,
right? Because
they might not even know it exists. And as you say, you're having to navigate a big system to try and find out what your rights are. And actually, whose duty do you think it is in the organisation to then make sure that those things are talked about more openly and more regularly and frequently? Is it line managers? Is it HR? Where do you think that should sit?
I think it's across the board.
Yeah.
I think it's like the people that you work with, your manager or managers, your key stakeholders, everyone in your organization, especially when you start, I think being made aware continually, because your life changes. If you've been in an organization for several years, you might have started off without a child. 5 years later, you might have a child. So again, are you aware now of what are those policies and procedures that will help you? And I'll go back to the last 5 years. I've been working compressed hours for three different organizations, and I used the opportunity when I was being interviewed by those said three different organizations, and I knew that through the interview process, obviously it was getting better and better for me. And so I used the opportunity at the stage of offer to actually ask for compressed hours. And I felt like that is a good time to actually utilize something that they know that they want you. And this is going to help me and my family save on childcare costs and spend a little bit more time with my child or children. And I felt like that was a good time to do it. So I think it's like, but the timing of sometimes when you request these things might be worth considering when you're at an offer stage of new employment.
I can imagine most people being quite nervous at offer stage to bring up something like that, because there is such a stigma, and because they've experienced in the past the feeling of guilt almost to request those things. I can imagine most people shying away from having a conversation like that at offer stage. So how did that go for you when you did that? I mean, did it take a lot of courage?
Definitely the first time it took courage. And I think the second time it was a bargaining tool. I used it because they wouldn't, from a salary perspective, meet my ultimate needs of what I wanted from a salary perspective. So in order to do the role, and I had a young child at the time who's sort of a year, 2 years old, I said, well, in order for me to save some costs, I'd like to work compressed hours. So work my 37 and a half hours in 4 days. And that saves me roughly around £400 a month in nursery costs. And they accepted that as part of my contracts. Again, it boils down to financial decisions. And are you using sort of like your bargaining tool at that stage? And I think that's a good time to do it, because once you're in a job, there's always the question of, could it be rejected? And what are the reasons for rejection? And I think that's a whole different podcast or subject, because I think we're not at that stage right now where we truly understand why aren't we giving this more often to people that are requesting it in the workplace.
I've definitely come across leaders before where they've actually talked, I've heard them openly, not openly, I've heard them talk behind closed doors before, saying, oh, that employee's being difficult. That's a narrative, difficult, just because they're asking for some flexibility. Have you come across that?
I have seen it, yes. And I feel like it's part of the stigma associated with it. I think, if senior leaders that are setting the direction of their organization from a policy and procedure perspective, are they truly living those the culture and the behaviors that those policies and procedures are there to do? Or is it just there as we have it, but actually it's going to be challenging for us to offer this up for you because it sets a precedent. Now, the precedent for me is flexibility and being adaptable to each individual needs at their time. And I think that should be assessed on an individual basis and not talk about setting precedents, because a precedent is just an excuse, I think. Sometimes.
Yeah. One size doesn't fit all. And this isn't just about support for parents, as you said earlier. This is support for somebody just joining the business and perhaps, early in their career and doesn't have children yet. This is for people that have got neurodiverse requirements. This is for anybody, really.
Caring responsibilities, there's all sorts of neat reasons why someone might want to have a flexible working arrangement that is not your standard 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And I'd like to point out that sort of like that whole Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, that's 100 years that's been around, right? Prior to that, before the 1920s, we were working 6-day working weeks, right? So, and you had Sunday off. So when is it going to change, right? It's like 100 years of this way of working. And I think like we need to sort of break down what is the future workplace and how do we keep people in your organization operating as well as they can be. And I think sort of like changing some of these like decades old like ways of working, I think is something that we should be exploring quite a lot right now.
Yeah, and you're definitely seeing it in other countries. I think I've seen some of the Scandinavian countries moving to like 4-day weeks. You're seeing companies move to that arrangement because, as you say, they're sort of questioning, why are we always sticking to this Monday to Friday 9 to 5? Someone once created that, and that's now gospel.
And when we were preparing for this, I just did a little bit of research, and I think the ONS has done a recent survey last year, and they worked out that about 10% of our workforce, so 1.5 million people, are already working sort of like flexible hours or compressed hours in the UK. So 10% are already doing that, and yet there's still a huge stigma associated with it. So how do we move that 10% into 20, 30, 40% in the next 10, 15 years? That's what organizations should be asking themselves, because it's there, it's happening, it's increasing, and it's going to be potentially a deal breaker for people, because there will be more organizations potentially that they could go and join that have this if your organization isn't prepared to do it.
There's a lot of competition out there, and I do think the future workforce wants something different. We used to work in an environment where it was very conformative, working towards following a policy, following a set structure. I don't think that's the way now.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think sort of if you're not able to sort of maybe adjust and understand what does the next generations coming through need over the next sort of 10, 15 years. Potentially you could be quite outdated as an organization, and you might actually seen as the dinosaur compared to some of the more modern practices by other organizations.
I agree. So on a personal level, how has the compressed hours arrangement, you said you've done it for 5 years, how has that helped you?
Yeah, it's helped me so much. It's helped not only me, it's helped from a well-being perspective. It's helped me quite a lot. I would say on reflection, from the first year or two that I started to do it to where I am now 5 years later, you get into such a different pattern where, you know, I'm a sort of project manager, PMO manager, and I get involved in sort of like projects and programs. And if I'm part of setting up something, I will obviously try and gear up my working week to deliver things between, I do Monday to Thursday, 37 and a half hours. And I try and do meetings and workshops within obviously Monday to Thursday, because Fridays for me is a no-go. That's when I get to spend my day with my daughter, who's now 1.5 years. And prior to that, my 5-year-old, when she was like up to 4.5, I spent every Friday with her. And it just meant that I get more quality time with my children, which, you know, is not to be underestimated because they grow up really quickly.
Too quickly.
And I just am very grateful to have had this time with them, this extra time. It saves on the burden of your partner sort of having to do a lot of admin and life things themselves, because I think there's a lot of pressure on working mums to be that person. So from a partner, I think like we should be supporting our wives and partners in terms of making sure that we're also taking on some of that burden. And I feel like when I come back to work on a Monday, I'm so much more productive because I'm ready to go. I know that I'm going to get things done in those 4 days. And so my working setup is there to sort of like really deliver everything I need to do and set out my clear objectives within those 4 days. Now, does it mean that sometimes I work late Monday to Thursday after I put the kids to bed? And you know, we've all been there, right? And we turn that laptop on. But I'll do that when I know that I've got to get things done and there are pressing deadlines. And I've made it work. And I've not honestly felt that different. And I feel like if you look at energy, we were talking about energy before recording this, you know, the energy that we bring to the table, there's a lot of energy from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday, but that starts tapering. And I don't know anyone that starts building up their energy levels come Thursday and Friday. So really, what is the point of a Friday sometimes? It's there to close things off and set yourself up for the next working week, is what, from a project and program perspective, that's the way I look at it. So why can't you do that on a Thursday afternoon?
Yeah, my brain is fried by a Friday. I'm like a zombie. But you're essentially more focused because you've got concentrated time to deliver what you need to deliver, and you're therefore very productive, and likewise more quality time at home. And that point about being able to be there for your daughters and your wife, we talk a lot about diversity. We talk a lot about equality in the workplace. This is such a significant component and contributor to that, because if our kids don't see that both partners are able to help, you know, parent them and dropping them to school or helping them with their homework, if they don't see that from a young age, that's all they've ever seen.
Definitely. It's, what role model are you actually sort of like subconsciously sort of like showing to your children, right? From a boy or a girl, I think sort of like they need to see both. If they have both parents there, you know, what are they both demonstrating, and what are they both role modeling to them? Because otherwise we're still going to have these very gendered stereotypical norms that you know, guys and partners can't be there for their children. And it's 2025. That's absolutely rubbish. We should be there. And whilst it's sometimes difficult to transition into being that kind of parent or, you know, support network beyond the weekends, I feel like working parents and partners should be pushing themselves to make it happen.
Absolutely. And it's about what's right for you personally at any given time in your journey. Do you think it's more difficult for men to have that conversation at work?
I personally do. Yeah. I mean, I was just reflecting in the last sort of 20 years that I've been working, how many conversations have I had with guys or dads about what it's like to parent, what it's like to maintain jobs versus deal with childcare responsibilities, and is your company sort of like there to support you? I can probably count those on one hand in 20 years, and I think there is just unspoken things that happen, and it's just not there that people are or dads and guys are just able to talk about it openly. And I feel like we need to do more. We need to do more. We need to speak more open about it. We need more open groups in the workplace and in our friendship groups to be able to talk about it more openly and actually challenge each other, like to sort of like say, do you think that's acceptable? Do you think your partner's getting the best out of you as well? It's like these are challenging discussions that guys need to have with each other, let alone whether the workplace is allowing you to have those discussions.
So true. It's funny when you've just been describing that. You and I both know my colleague John in my team. John had a football match that he needed to leave earlier for, and he felt really bad for asking. And I said, John, go. Just go. Don't worry. Just go. And it is just this, it's almost like we're limiting ourselves sometimes with assumptions of what the workplace expects.
Yeah, definitely.
Just because that has always been the norm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sort of like just to that example, maybe if John grew up in a workplace culture for his career, which he's 20 years in, right? If he was like able to talk about that from an earlier position, maybe he wouldn't have felt uncomfortable and he would have actually quite openly asked about it, or maybe just done it and told you about it afterwards, or whatever it is. But I think sort of like we've got a long way to go before sort of dads and supportive parents are able to feel comfortable having honest discussions with their managers and their teams. I'll point to an example that a good friend of mine who works for Lloyd's. So his second child was born a couple of years ago, and their policy at the time was he could get 6 months parental leave, which is incredible, right? A supportive parent going on 6 months, and they would have to backfill his role whilst he went and spent time with his child, and he could do that after his wife's annual maternity leave. So you potentially getting a year and a half's worth of support there, which he decided to do. And when he was explaining this to his colleagues, they also had the opportunity to do that with their children, and they didn't take it up. And the reasons that he was given was they would find that too challenging for themselves. They wouldn't know what to do. They wouldn't know where to start. And again, like, why are we having people say that? It's we should be supporting people, right? And we should be allowing people to sort of explore and talk about their fears, and allow people to explore, well, is it really going to be that different to what you do at the weekends, etc.? Do you know what I mean? It's like there's all these things that people are not using because there's a fear associated with it. And I don't know, I love spending time with my children, so I don't necessarily understand why that would be challenging.
No, I agree. Do you think it affects people's performance when they're not able to get the right balance because they've got quite a restrictive environment they're working in?
Oh, I can only imagine that is probably very strong, that, people are feeling like they're not able to be their best selves. They're not able to sort of like work around a pattern that really suits what they need. And they're forcing schedules into work that is just almost not feasible. So are you really going to get the best out of those individuals? I'm pretty certain the answer is no. And, we go back to sort of how do you, from a compressed hours perspective, how does someone know that I'm delivering what I need to do between Monday to Thursday? And I feel I've got a responsibility responsibility, and my manager's got a responsibility, and the people that I work with on my projects have got a responsibility to make sure that my objectives of what I'm setting out to do on any given period is very clear, very measurable, and very sort of like you're able to see tangible outputs. And if I'm doing those things, you could break it down from a month to a week to a day. Why can't I sort of like do this in a way that allows me to work 4 days in 5? I feel like it's so obvious how you should be able to do it, but are we really supporting people to do that? And it goes into companies that are trialing 4-day working weeks. How are they doing it? What have they done to determine whether you're still being productive if the whole organisation is working 4 days rather than 5? I think Cambridge, local authority, has recently done 600 staff are all now working 4-day working weeks after an initial year trial. So they've obviously got when you think about who works for a local authority and what they do, very different roles, but they've obviously managed to make it work. And it's a government type organisation, and they're a lot more modern than, some private organisations.
It's incredible, isn't it? I think there's going to be a lot more data coming out from some of those experimental companies, organisations that are trialling that 4-day week. And I hope that people will start to embrace a different way of working.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sort of you need to hear, at the end of anything that we deliver, we're always talking about sort of like presenting what were the benefits, what are the things that you set out to do, what was your budget, all that good stuff, right? In terms of like an overview of the things that worked and the things that didn't work. I think any trial, you need to understand how what are the guardrails that you're setting within the trial, and how do you determine success, and what are those sort of like measurable things that you're going to be looking at. I think you need to sort of like have a very clear understanding of that before you decide to go and trial something. I just feel like we need to hear more about companies that have trialed these things, and that be quite open discussions with, HR directors or chief people officers and CEOs, that they're sort of like aware of all of these trials, and companies that have trialed these things, are they really being showed that there's actually no difference, or maybe even an increase in performance within some of those organisations.
Yeah, I think more transparency, more openness. We need to start seeing and hearing about this much more. I think that's why this episode is really important to get out there, because our audience needs to hear about it. It's important that we're talking about these things. So if there was one lesson that you feel has not yet been learned that you'd want to share with organisations today, what would that be?
I think if you want to distill this down to one thing, I think you need to start having that discussion and, confront the uncomfortable nature of what it means to have flexible working practices or compressed hours or moving to a 4-day working week, or why aren't people actually utilising these sort of like parental policies more, etc. I think actually confronting the discussion and then getting people within your organisation to actually have targeted discussions around it would be a great start. It's like that's the only way you're going to start moving forward in terms of listening to what the fears are, what the challenges that people might have, whether it's the person utilising that policy or compressed hours, or the person that they're going to be reporting into, or the team themselves, perceptions that surround it. I think like just having that open discussion, I think we would do probably a lot more would be a lot more progressive over the next few years if more people started having those discussions.
Yeah, and almost stop avoiding it.
Exactly.
Yeah, stop avoiding the uncomfortable and let's talk about it.
Definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for coming along today, Noel.
Thanks so much, Kiran.
Thanks. The CI fix from today's episode is to make sure that we're having these really important conversations, that we're being open and transparent, that we're not shying away from these difficult conversations. And also making sure that we're challenging the status quo, not always conforming to the norm just because it's the way things have always been done. We all have an important part to play as role models for the future generation. So I hope today's episode has inspired you to go out there, have those difficult conversations, challenge the status quo, and make sure that we're accommodating the needs of our teams. Thank you for joining today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you next time. This episode is sponsored by Inspiring Dads, helping HR leaders accelerate gender equality by giving dads the practical support they need to thrive, including one-to-one coaching, workshops, and group coaching and parental leave benchmarking.